A narcissist does not enter a room and randomly attach to whoever is nearest. They scan, they assess, they identify, within minutes, sometimes seconds, the person most likely to supply what they need, least likely to detect what they are, and most likely to remain in place once the trap is closed. The person they select has qualities the narcissist cannot generate: genuine empathy, deep loyalty, a high tolerance for ambiguity, and enough self-doubt to question their own perceptions when those perceptions start sending alarms. In other words, they select for strength, and then they use that strength as the mechanism of entrapment. If you have ever been in a relationship where you felt like you were losing your own reality, where you found yourself apologizing for things you did not do, where you worked harder and harder to get back to a version of the relationship that seemed to exist only in the first few weeks, you were not confused. You were inside a system, one that was designed to produce exactly what you were experiencing. The confusion was the product. In the next 18 minutes, I am going to decode the narcissistic selection and entrapment architecture. I am going to show you the specific psychological profile that registers as a target, the idealization devaluation discard cycle and its neurological basis, and the trauma bonding mechanism that makes leaving feel structurally impossible, even when the rational case for leaving is overwhelming. This is clinical psychology applied at full precision. By the end, you will have a framework that explains something that was previously inexplicable: why it happened, how it worked, and what it was actually doing to your brain. The research here comes from clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula's peer-reviewed work on narcissistic personality in intimate relationships, Craig Malkin's 2015 diagnostic framework, and Patrick Carnes' clinical documentation of trauma bonding, a concept originally developed to explain hostage psychology and subsequently identified in domestic abuse contexts across multiple studies. This is not anecdote. Let's decode the architecture. Clinical research on narcissistic partner selection has consistently identified a cluster of traits that appear in targets at rates significantly higher than the general population. The first is high empathy. Not ordinary empathy, extraordinary empathy. The capacity to feel what another person is feeling so acutely that the target will often suppress their own discomfort to prevent the other person's. For the narcissist, who is running on a deficit of genuine emotional reciprocity and requires constant external supply to regulate their self-image, a highly empathic partner is a generator that never runs out. The empathic person will fill silence with warmth, will interpret cruelty charitably, will try harder when the relationship deteriorates, will attribute the narcissist's behavior to pain rather than malice. This is not weakness. It is a genuine human quality. It is simply catastrophically mismatched to this particular context. The second is conscientiousness, the psychological trait associated with reliability, follow-through, and personal responsibility. A conscientious person, when told the relationship is failing because of them, will work to fix it. They will take the assigned responsibility even if it belongs to someone else. They will honor commitments, even when the other party has long since stopped honoring theirs. For the narcissist, a conscientious partner is a person who will maintain the structure of the relationship unilaterally while the narcissist extracts from it. The third is a specific form of self-doubt, not a global lack of confidence, but a susceptibility to questioning their own perceptions when those perceptions conflict with an authority figure's account. This trait is often the product of an earlier environment, a childhood in which the child's experience was routinely contradicted or dismissed, creating a learned pattern of deferring to external accounts of reality over internal ones. The narcissist identifies this susceptibility, often within the first few conversations, and exploits it systematically. The cycle has 3 phases, and each is neurologically distinct. The idealization phase, what we cover in more depth in the love bombing video, is the period of intense, accelerated intimacy that precedes any genuine knowledge of another person. The narcissist presents an idealized version of themselves, mirrors the target's own values and desires back at them, and creates an atmosphere of profound connection and urgency. During this phase, the target's brain is flooding with dopamine, oxytocin, and norepinephrine. The neurochemical state is not different from early romantic love. It is an engineered version of it, produced at deliberate intensity by someone who has learned, consciously or not, that this state creates bonding. The critical function of the idealization phase is not connection. It is debt. The target invests emotionally, cognitively, socially, in a version of the relationship that will subsequently be withdrawn. This investment is the leverage. The devaluation phase begins so gradually that the target cannot identify the transition. Criticism that is subtle. Withdrawal that is ambiguous. Moments of warmth that interrupt the pattern just frequently enough to maintain hope. The target, now deeply bonded and deeply invested, tries to recover the relationship of the idealization phase. They work harder. They apologize more. They modify their behavior. None of it restores what they are trying to restore, because what they are trying to restore never existed independently of the narcissist's strategic deployment. During this phase, the target experiences what is neurologically indistinguishable from intermittent reinforcement. The same mechanism that makes slot machines more addictive than consistent reward dispensers. Unpredictable, occasional warmth in a context of chronic criticism and withdrawal creates a stronger attachment bond than consistent warmth would. The uncertainty amplifies the attachment. This is not irrational. It is a precisely predictable response to a specific pattern of stimulus. The brain is doing exactly what it was built to do. It was built for a different predator. The discard phase, which may occur multiple times, including returns and re-entries, terminates the formal relationship but often not the psychological one. The target is left with an internalized version of the narcissist's judgments, a corrupted sense of their own reliability, as a witness to their experience, and a trauma bond that does not dissolve automatically upon the relationship's end. Patrick Carnes coined the term trauma bonding in 1997 to describe the strong emotional attachment that develops between an abused victim and their abuser, specifically as a result of the pattern of abuse itself, rather than in spite of it. The mechanism is cortisol and adrenaline combined with intermittent positive reinforcement. During periods of conflict, threat, or criticism, the target's stress response activates, cortisol spikes. The nervous system goes into high alert. During subsequent moments of reconciliation or affection, the relief is neurochemically amplified. Because of the preceding stress, the contrast creates a high, and the person comes to associate the abuser with relief from the very anxiety the abuser created. This is the same architecture that produces Stockholm Syndrome, the documented phenomenon where hostages develop positive feelings toward their captors. In Patty Hearst's 1974 kidnapping case, FBI negotiators found a person who had been held captive for weeks by the Symbionese Liberation Army, not just cooperating with her captors but actively assisting their criminal activities. The psychological community initially struggled to explain this as anything other than cowardice or ideological conversion. Subsequent research identified the mechanism. When a person's survival depends entirely on the goodwill of their captor, the brain finds ways to generate that goodwill, including genuine affective bonding. The domestic abuse context is not identical, but the neurological architecture is the same. The brain does not distinguish between a captor who controls your physical freedom and a partner who controls your emotional reality. It responds to the same survival imperative by the same mechanism. Understanding the mechanism does not automatically free you from it. The trauma bond is neurological. It persists after the rational case for leaving has been made, accepted, and re-accepted dozens of times. This is why just leave is not a coherent response to this situation. It is a response that fails to account for the architecture. What the research does show is that the bond weakens through consistent interruption of the reinforcement pattern, which requires fundamentally distance, not intellectual distance, physical distance that prevents the continuing stimulus from continuing. Because the central damage of narcissistic entrapment is the corruption of the target's ability to trust what they observe. The framework is not closure, it is reconstruction. Narcissists do not choose randomly. They identify the qualities that make a person generous, loyal, and self-questioning, and they construct a system that converts those qualities into leverage. The selection is precise, the mechanism is reliable, and the intelligence or social sophistication of the target offers almost no protection, because the mechanism operates at the neurological level, below the threshold where intelligence operates. What offers protection is prior knowledge of the pattern, the ability to recognize the architecture before the investment is made, the capacity to trust your own perceptions, even when someone with apparent authority over the relationship is contradicting them. That is what this framework gives you. Not comfort, recognition,